Okay, and after a play blast, we end up with this. So right away, what you'll notice is that it's, well, very noticeable when this thing fades out. It's like basically turning a dimmer switch on and off with a light. And so what will help with the detail of this glow field is adding a noise. Let's go to our large plume build. Here we have, again, our scatter. That is going to be a vector volume though. So we need a attribute noise vector. However, if we apply a noise to this vector, we are going to change the color. So we need to, in other words, start off with a float field, put the noise on a float field, and then multiply that against the vector field. So that, again, we're multiplying all the vector values by the same value, and we're not changing the colors that way. So let's do this. There is a vector split, VDB vector split. And let's go ahead and get rid of this guy. Okay, we're going to split up scatter into X, Y, Z. We're going to then delete everything except for scatter X. And then we can apply a fog volume. So a volume noise fog. And let's set our volume slice to that. So we'll go right here. And here is scatter X. Let's multiply that. Let's also enable a remap ramp for the values. And we will add a bit of contrast like this. Okay. Now, right now this is affecting density, so we don't want that. We want scatter.x. And now we can see the result. So let's not actually clip this to 0. Let's make the minimum something that's hovering above, probably right around there. And likewise, we'll just kind of make our contrast in the middle values like so. Once we have that, we can turn down our element size a little bit, maybe go to our animation, animate that, pulse duration, something really low like 0.1. And then for the fractal, we'll add a bit of linearity, a bit of roughness, and we can also change the noise type here to whatever we want. So we could do whirly. I kind of like the whirly cellular F1. It's kind of a cool look. So let's go with that. And we'll also turn up this amplitude a little bit like so to compensate. So before the noise, after the noise. So right around there. Okay, now that we have this, we're going to use this field to multiply against our original scatter. So take that, we're going to merge it in so that we now have scatter X, which we will rename using a primitive wrangle. We'll call this our scatter mults. So name is equal to scatter mults right there. So now scatter mults and scatter. Let's take a volume wrangle. And we could say that we want scatter times equals at scatter mults. What we'll notice is that there's no change. And to make that change, we have to specifically say that this is a vector scatter. So V at scatter times F at scatter mults. And that will now work. From here, let's turn up the amplitude until we have about the same values that we had before. So this will be before and after. That looks roughly the same. I'll probably turn this up to the full 10 right here. And there we go. Lots of detail added with this just one thing. So let's also go here and really be sure that the animation is happening quickly. 0.05 on that animate noise. From here, I'm going to do another play blast and I'll show you the resulting effect. And after doing that, we have a much more chaotic look. Now it's up to you if you want to extend this longer or not. And again, to show you where we were before, that's what we had. So it's kind of a fade that's looking very artificial and not very real. I'm going to go back to our object level and extend out the flame a bit more. So going up here again to the flame, let's change the keyframe to go a bit further out like that. And that will be pretty good. On the scatter, what I'll do is I will take the gamma here, set it back to 1, and actually we'll take that and the gain down to 0.8. So we still have some of that darker detail laying on top, maybe even a bit less on the gain, maybe even a bit less at 0.5. I think that's where we were before. So yeah, right around there is pretty decent. One thing that you'll want to do is leave room for the flame, because when we turn this on, you'll notice that we get all this extra detail now coming along with it. And that's really, really cool. And so don't go too crazy on the scatter, because we're going to essentially use the flame to add more detail on top of that. So even with the scatter here, I'll turn it down to maybe a value of around 3000. The gamma, we could change that to maybe 0.75, or actually we'll go up to make it more glowy in general. So 1.25. And turn down the gain to add more of the smoke on top. So maybe 0.4. So something right around here is pretty awesome. Now on the smoke here, because we are taking away density towards the edges, that gives us a bit more room to turn up this shadow density. So if I do that at 1.5, now we have all of this going on. And that's starting to look pretty darn cool. So that's where I'll leave it for right now. Take that back. We'll do the intensity here at 2000, but I think you guys get the idea. There is one last step to getting this all working just fine, and that is by adding a volume light. My recommendation for this is to simply go here and create a geometry light. So go create a geolight, like so. Set the primitive to be the large plume build, and we will take volume 0. And then all we do is enable to set the diffuse contribution right here and restart Karma. As soon as we do that, we now have a volume light, and that really makes this whole thing now shine. I like setting this light source diffuse up to maybe a value of 2 or so. Let's restart the render. So maybe 2 or 3, something like that. And I think 3 will be pretty nice, actually. Then let's go back to our materials and start turning things down. So with the scatter, we'll turn our intensity here to 500. The hot core scale maybe down to 5500. Our fire can be 25, something a lot lower. And I think that this is looking pretty darn good for the most part. Do realize that the higher you turn up that volume light, the more blurred out everything gets. So you do lose out on some high contrast detail. One thing you can do at this point is turn up the density a bit. So let's go to 300. And we can also get away, like I said, with a higher shadow density if we'd like. So those are all options. I'm going to go back up here to the fire and turn this up to a value of 50. Kind of go back and forth between the density and fire until we end up with something around here. Maybe even less than that, probably about 35. And, well, you can keep adjusting this to your heart's content. One thing I will do is I'll send off another test render of 30 frames. Let's make sure that this is looking nice, and we could take it from there. So after doing that, we end up with this, which I think looks pretty darn good. It's very close to what we have in reference. If you want to, we can keep the glow around for a bit longer. We do see that in the actual explosion sometimes. So when trying to cut off the flame, what you would do is you would cut off the flame at a different timing than what you would cut off the glowy field, the scatter field. So that's one thing that we can do. For right now though, I'm going to call this good. And in the next video, let's move on to lighting considerations.